So your out-of-body experiences happen whenever you feel like there's no way to control it, or that you just don't have the ability to control it, and it just does what it does whenever it wants to, and you're not even able to stop it when you don't want it to happen. But I want you to understand that not only do you have the ability to control your out-of-body experiences, you also have the ability to manage it in a way where you can do what you want to do with it and allow for it to be very beneficial to you. The key is to knowing how those parts of yourself that allow for these experiences to happen work. How do they communicate? And what's a way of tapping into those parts so that you can use the ability that you already have? Let's talk about that. Welcome back to another episode. I'm Vernita, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about the power that you have to control your spontaneous out-of-body experiences. Now, like I said before, in order for you to control your experiences with the ability that you already have, the ability to control it, you have to know how the aspects of yourself work that allow for it to happen in the first place. But even before that, you have to know what are those aspects of yourself. And if you recall from other episodes, I talked about your higher self being the part of you that allows for this to happen. But it goes deeper than that. See, before we talk about the higher self, let's take a step back and talk about your origins as a soul in the three primary forms of being. So I always talk about how you're not your body. You're a soul that's made up of spirit. And spirit is like raw energy that's not in any form. It's just expressing itself. And you can think of this raw energy expression as light that is expressing itself. Before light expressed itself, it was absorbed unto itself. That is the source from which everything is, was, and always will be. All light within the electromagnetic frequencies that we know of, that is absorbed within itself, that's not expressing, that at some point began to express itself, which is how we see all light as being white. Before it expressed itself, it was dark. Light absorbed into itself. So now after that light expressed itself, right, and we have white light, that's just raw energy that's just shining brightly everywhere. That is the first energy expression, or the first form of being, or the first knowingness of self, the first awareness of I am. So with all the light that's expressing itself, you're like that part that's right there, okay? That section of all of this light. All the sections are made up of the same stuff. You're that little section that's right there, okay? So now that section decides to take a form. It's not just raw light, raw energy that's expressing. It's now being contained in a form. This form is a light body, okay? Just imagine a circle, for an example. Let's just keep it simple. Before it was expressing, now it's taking a shape, such as a circle. That is the second form of being, or I should say primary form of being, because there's multiple ways in which the source or light expresses itself. But I'm talking about the three primary ways. So this light body, this primary form of being as a spirit that has now taken a form, has multiple experiences in multiple dimensions, multiple realities. This body is a soul body. And it's the soul body because it's now spirit that has taken a form. And as it's having its multiple experiences, there are memories of these experiences that's felt by this light body form. Okay? It is soul. And all the various experiences that it has, you can say that these are various parts that make up soul. Now, one example I like to use to explain this is water and ice. Let's say that there's a lake in the wintertime that freezes. Now, the whole lake doesn't freeze. It looks like the top part is frozen, but underneath is still water, right? So the lake freezes, and let's say the top part of the lake that's frozen gets disturbed some kind of way. Maybe someone is trying to skate, ice skate on it and then falls through. Any type of thing just happens to disturb this ice, right? When the disturbance happens, the ice turns into little pieces. So now you have pieces of ice that's floating in the water below. And so if you think about it, each one of these pieces of ice is having its own experience, yet it's still part of the overall water. So even though it's frozen and it's ice, it's part of the water, and even though those frozen pieces of ice has its own experience, it's part of the water. It is parts of soul that's made up of the same spirit, the same stuff. Ice made up of water. So just think of the freezing of the water being the equivalent of memory being held. Each one of these pieces of ice are like memories. The water as a whole feels the memories or experiences the memories while the ice is having the experience all at the same time. So that's just another way I like to look at it. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, but that's just a way that really helps me to remember soul and spirit in a way of looking at it that's more practical and in a way to understand it from a third dimensional standpoint. So now the third way or third primary form of being is when that light that's formed, again, we're using circle as an example, decides to take a denser form. So now it's not light as we know it. It's now a body, a dense body, such as a human body or an animal. So all of this is important because all three forms are all connected. It's all one. It's all made up of the same stuff, the same light, the same source, the same spirit. And it's just expressing itself in multiple ways, in multiple dimensions, multiple realities, all at the same time. So when you have your out-of-body experiences, you are literally viewing the places that you go from the perspective of the non-physical versions of self. From these aspects or these versions of self or forms of being, it's the nature in which these forms are. You see, always having multiple experiences at the same time in multiple dimensions and in multiple ways of expressing itself. The physical, dense form of you is now becoming aware that the soul or spirit of you does this. It is a continuous, nonstop expression and experience. Now, to take it a step further, the denser part of you is the equivalent to the 3D, third dimensional aspect of self or human self. That light body that we talked about, that second primary form of being, is the equivalent of the fourth dimensional you, the non-physical version of you that literally does the same things that you do as a physical version, but is lighter, is not so dense. So that way of expressing, there's ways in which it can express itself that you as a physical being cannot because you're so dense. But it has the same type of way of being in the way in which it's having experiences, it's feeling those experiences and expressing itself through emotion, but not the same type of emotion that a denser form would have. That energy that's moving from a fourth dimensional standpoint or a soul standpoint also is not perfect. So the way in which we have our negatives and our positives, as we want to call it here in the third dimension, or the way in which the third dimensional body works, you have the same thing in a fourth dimensional way of viewing things. There's positive, there's negative, everything is a spectrum. Everything is not perfect. And people make the mistake of thinking in that reality that all is perfect and all is this and that. Not fourth dimension. We're not there yet. So now when it comes to the section of spirit that you are, right? That area that hasn't taken form yet, but you are that area. That's the equivalent of the 5D self, which is your higher self. Your higher self is an aspect or section of the all light frequency that is expressing itself. It's that section right there. That is your higher self. And there's many more dimensions above it because there is a big difference between that 5D version of you and the you that is not an individualized section. Because once you go up past the little section there, it's no more an individual. It's all one light expression. I personally call that the highest self. That's part of all that is higher than the higher self, which is the more individualized parts. Now, your higher self and the highest versions of self communicate via images. Your higher self also communicates telepathically with you. And as a matter of fact, it sounds like you're thinking, you know how that inner voice, like if you're thinking about something and is you, well, you also can receive information through that thinking voice, and it's not you thinking. It's something else that's using your inner thinking voice to communicate with you. Most of the time, that's your higher self when you are in a state of calm and not freaking out about what's happening. When you're in an altered state where you just relax and allow things to happen, most of the time that is your higher self. Now there's other loving beings that can communicate with you through that thinking mind. And there's also some nefarious beings and also technology that people in this reality have used to use your inner mind, thought, voice to communicate as well. So you have to have discernment to know the difference, and you will have discernment when you're in those altered states, as long as you don't freak out and you get to the point of understanding yourself and knowing yourself from a more loving way, and allowing that love frequency to be your default. You receive information through your thinking voice, and that's your higher self communicating with you. And your highest self can do that as well. But when I had communications with a more higher version than the higher self, and I'm trying to look, let me say this. I'm doing the best I can to simplify this from a human perspective. But the things that I'm talking about is very challenging, quite honestly, to put into words. Because really there is no words to fully describe the essence of us. Every time we use language, every time we put something in a box or label it, it takes away from the essence. However, this is how we communicate in this reality, right? So I've got to think of ways to make it make sense. And I'm doing the best I can, but I've had experiences. I'm not going to go into any long, drawn out, detailed story on this episode, but I've had experiences with two versions of highest self that were me, but it wasn't me because it was higher than the higher self. So it was kind of interesting how that worked. But anyway, the way they communicated was all through images. And when I had this experience out of my body, which I wasn't in a body, it was just a mind experience. As they were communicating, they were using scenarios and different lights and different things to express themselves. And the version of me that's a step above the me in this reality was pretty much being like a translator, translating the information to me in real time in this altered state so that I understood. Because me as Vernita didn't know what was going on. But as it was happening, I did, because that it was like that fourth dimensional self. It was like the soul self transferring the information, or it may have been the higher self. It's like, I really don't like to break things down like this because we get stuck on words a lot. But whatever you want to call it, it was a step above the me that's talking to you now. And the two that were higher or highest, however you want to look at it, were way up there in dimension, way up there. And there's another sense that I had where I knew that. Okay. And so I'm saying this to you so that you understand that you yourself have the ability to communicate with these various different aspects of yourself. I want you to know, if you haven't had that communication, that it exists and it's part of the control process. For me, I allow for the spontaneous OBEs to happen because they happen to me at night, usually, or instead of sleeping, I'm having an out-of-body experience. Now, if it was happening to me during the daytime while I'm walking, it's because I know some people that have told me that, they're driving and they can start feeling their body separate. That's a whole other thing. So we need to have a whole other discussion privately as it relates to that. But when it comes to having these out-of-body experiences where it's not disturbing your normal day-to-day, for me, I just allow for them to happen. Okay? But if I did not want them to happen, there's communication that can have with these other versions of self in order to stop them from happening at certain times and allow it to happen in other times. So you can program yourself in different ways, but we're starting with, I'm coming on down and getting to the human 3D self in a second. But I want you to know that these other selves are available to you to communicate with you, and they communicate via images. So that's why your imagination is very important. It's an important part of communicating. People talk about the imagination a lot when it comes to manifestation, but also when it comes to how you want to program the higher versions of yourself to assist you with this lower version of yourself. You communicate with them through mentally. You don't have to speak. That's what we do here. You have images and also thoughts, you see, without speaking. Images and thoughts. But you do this when you're in an altered state. So when you're either out of your body or when you're in like a half sleep type of state. It's called the hypnagogic or hypnopompic, and I may even be pronouncing that wrong, but those are what is known as scientifically. Okay. I just call it half sleep state. Very simple. That state is a very important state to use to communicate with the higher aspects of self and with your own body, to train it when it comes to your own body, and also to communicate with the other aspects in order to let it know how you want to work in this reality as it relates to these non-physical senses that you have an ability to come out of your body. Hope that makes sense. So getting back to the 4D self, that is a spirit realm body. That is the body that you use when you're astral traveling. But of course, there's more to OBEs and astral travel. You can take your consciousness and go other places. Remote viewing, not the type that they teach, but the type that naturally happens, is a form of out-of-body. And of course, there's so many different types of out-of-body experiences because you can bilocate and trilocate and all of that. The point I'm making is that when it comes to the fourth dimensional self, that spirit realm where everything happens, regardless of how you got into that realm, that non-physical realm is the 4D, is the soul you, is the spirit or the aspect of you that's taking that second form that does what it does. And there's so many different ways in which it expresses itself in that realm. Like I said, talking about astral travel is one form of expression. your mind or your consciousness going into other things, other people's bodies, other versions of self is another expression. Remote viewing is another expression. The bilocation and the trilocation is happening. You can feel it. That is the body or the form, the second form that you're using when light is expressing itself in those various ways. All right, so now moving on, that you are as the soul you permeates the physical body. So it's bigger than the physical body. It makes up the aura that people talk about. It is the part that is like around and through the physical body, meaning it's integrated itself with the body that you use to navigate this reality. Now, I keep things simple and also call it the etheric body. I don't separate etheric body over here, astral body over there, spirit over here, soul over there. I just mash them all together because I've seen this body. It's also known as a body double, and the body double is what I've seen. Now, some people have seen that body double with layers. I don't see the layers. I see all of it as one whole. There are times when I'm in an altered state and I'm sleeping and I have a reaction to a dream, and I'm kind of like in a bilocation type of situation where I'm in the dream, but I'm also feeling myself from and experiencing myself from laying in the bed type of thing. So what I do is I've seen my arms and I've seen my chest lift up, but not my physical body, my etheric spirit, soul version of self that looks just like this physical body lifts up, right? So I'm looking, I see it. And so because that's how I see it, I put it all together. Now, like I said, other people like to do the little separations, which is fine. Now, all of this makes up the you that you have access to and the ability to communicate with that assists you with the control of all of this. So how are you even from a third dimensional human body standpoint able to even communicate with this part of you? And the thing about it is that the same way that you can communicate with that part of you is the same way in which you're receiving information from that part of you that's allowing you to be able to experience all of this to begin with. All of the non-physical experiences that you have that go along with the OBEs. This is happening because you have a very active pineal gland, which is in the center of the brain, not dead in the center, but a little further back. There's several parts within the center of the brain that works along with the pineal gland, allowing you to use that pineal gland as an antenna that receives information. So you got the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus. There's also the thalamus in there. There's just parts of the brain in the middle of the brain. Your brain is lit up, all right? It's like a light bulb that is turned on real bright. And that's a wonderful thing. See, let me break this down real quick. All of us have a pineal gland that's turned on. But there's a difference between a pineal gland that's turned on versus one that's activated. Just like with your cell phone. Your cell phone can be on right now. But because you didn't tap any of the apps, those apps are not activated. They're on, but you haven't activated by tapping it, right? Some kind of way you have activated your pineal gland, and because you don't know how you activate it, all these things are happening and no one's taught you how to use it or anything about all these things. But you have an active pineal gland, and the difference between one that's active and one that's turned on is that in its regular state, not active, but there, it produces serotonin and melatonin. Now, melatonin happens at night, serotonin during the day. I'm not getting into all of that because that's not what the point of this podcast is. But the point is, the reason why I want to mention it is because of the melatonin. When you activate your pineal gland, and yours is already activated, that's how you're having these experiences. Your pineal gland becomes like a receiver, just like an antenna. It is receiving information that's coming through that non-physical aspect of you that is permeating the body. It's receiving information, and that information, which is also considered light, is changing the structure of the melatonin, allowing it to produce certain chemicals in a certain way in which it wasn't producing it before. Your melatonin produces chemicals that give you a hallucinogenic effect. It is known that it produces DMT. So people who are taking DMT externally or going to South America and with the shamans and all this kind of stuff, they don't have to do that. People who are having problems with going to sleep at night, insomnia, that's the name of it. They're told to take melatonin and all that. Like, your pineal gland produces this already. You just have those people just have to know how to trigger certain things within it, right? Now, for you, the information that's coming in is mixing with the melatonin. It is literally shifting it. Now, the melatonin is like this powerful substance, more powerful than it already was. And it's flowing through the middle of your brain and going down to other parts of your body. And you are just having these wonderful, otherworldly experience as a result of this. Having a relationship with your pineal gland is another way of training or giving the order to yourself of when you want to allow for these things to happen, these OBEs, and when you don't. You literally use your mind to communicate with that part of self. You can speak if you want to, but again, it is what you are imagining and is what you are saying or communicating internally using that inner voice where everyone gets the message. Your pineal gland gets the message. The aspect of you that's larger, the true you, which is the soul self, gets the message. Those highest, way up there versions of self get the message. You can train yourself. The ability is already there because you have an active pineal gland. So now it's about understanding that in order to be able to train yourself, to turn things on, off, or tell yourself what you want to be more active with. Myself knows that I love clairaudience more than clairvoyance, as an example. So when it comes to your OBEs, training yourself is in the same way. What do you prefer when it comes to these non-physical senses that you have? When do you want them to happen? Do you want them to happen at all? I would suggest that you do, because it's very beneficial. But you can train yourself. The last thing you want to do is shut your pineal gland down, because the experiences that you're having is a part of who you truly are. They're already occurring anyway. You're just now aware of it because of your active pineal gland. Use what you already have that's naturally occurring in ways that other people don't even, they are trying to figure out how to activate the pineal gland. Yours is already activated. Use what you have already activated to be able to communicate with higher versions of yourself so that you can not only control your experiences, but also control other things in your life and get information as it relates to other things in your life. So again, to recap, you have 3 primary forms of being, 3 ways in which consciousness or light expresses itself. And then you also have 3 primary parts of self that make up the individualized self. You have the whole, which you're an aspect of, a part of, an extension of. And then you have the individual part of self, where your higher self, which is the 5th dimensional part, is at the top of. Then you have the 4th dimensional part, And then you have the third dimensional part. That third dimensional aspect of you tips into the fourth dimensional many times in this reality. I guarantee it does. I don't even need to talk to you to know that. And we can talk about that at another time. But I wanted to mention that because it's important for you to know that Earth right now it's in a process of moving into the fourth dimension, but some of us is already experiencing the fourth dimensional version of Earth, while other people are still experiencing the third dimensional version. So, and I'm mentioning that because it becomes a challenge when I'm talking about third dimensional body versus fourth dimensional body, when the third dimensional is or going to be, and sometimes is already for you, the fourth dimensional. So how do you differentiate between that and then the old fourth dimensional? Which is why another point I want to make is don't get so caught up in words and labels to describe yourself. Everything is a spectrum. There's many areas in between. Anytime you label something, you're taking away from its essence. What I'm talking about and what you're experiencing truly cannot be put into words. There is nothing that I can say on this podcast that will give what I'm talking about its full understanding. It's the reason why in matriarchal societies, they didn't need to speak. It's the reason why if you want the whole truth of something, you receive it telepathically or within the mind's eye. Images. There's nothing to speak because speaking lowers it. It dumbs it down. I'm not going to go off on a tangent with that. I'm just going to say that and leave you with that. So hopefully you have a better understanding of self and know that you do indeed have the power to control and manage your out-of-body experiences because of the non-physical aspects of you that's already doing what it's doing and is able to communicate with you and you with it. When you allow for yourself to use the center of your brain to assist with that communication, you have control. You always have. No one in this reality told you that because the powers that be, the system that we live in, don't want people to know the truth of themselves. All right? So if you have any questions, go to askvernita.com and I will reply back to you directly. It's coming directly to me. Whatever you send comes to me, and I'm going to send directly from me to you. With that said, many blessings to you, much love, and see you next week.